activ să susțină inovațiile și să susțină, de fapt, inovațiile din cadrul sectorului public. De asemenea, poate unii au mai auzit despre noțiunea de obligațiuni cu impact social. Scuzați-mă un pic de emoții, obligațiuni cu impact social. Și aș vrea să spun că astăzi vom descoperi, de fapt, sunt obligațiunile cu impact social o alternativă viabilă de finanțare în Republica Moldova și nu în ultimul rând vom trece în revistă și întrebarea dacă poate crowdfunding-ul să servească ca o platformă, ca o modalitate de finanțare pentru inovațiile din sectorul public, nu doar să suplimenteze sau să susțină cauzele sociale. Și în această ordine de idei aș vrea să-l prezint pe primul vorbitor, pe care cei care au fost în cadrul discuțiilor de panel l-au auzit și l-au putut savura din plin, domnul Indi Johar. Este un cunoscut inovator în spațiul cunoscătorilor și o să-l las pe dumnealui să treacă în revistă, de fapt, prezentarea cu care a venit astăzi. Indi, can you join us, please? Okay.
So, actually, do we need a mic?
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, so
Hi. So the question firstly to ask is, why are we talking about alternative finance? Let's even start the first premise of the question. And here's a little bit of stats that I want to throw at you, just to give you an idea of why this is important. So, the global humanitarian aid budget, right? How much do you think it is? The global humanitarian aid budget. Idea. Give me some guess. Year, for the year. Yeah, approximately. Approximately, just make some guesses. 10 billion. 300 billion. Much more? Go on, make a guess. 25. You're on the money. 25 billion. 25 billion is the global humanitarian aid budget. Now the second part of the question. How much bubble gum do you think we buy annually? About 27 billion. So the total bubblegum economy of the world is 27 billion. The total humanitarian aid budget is 24 billion. So when we start to talk about this, I often want to just firstly start by saying that. Second question. The biggest social investment fund in the world is, I'm not going to do more questions because people get bored, but you get the idea, right? So the biggest social investment fund in the world is circa 600 million in the UK. It's called Big Society Capital. The welfare budget for the UK annually, 400 billion. 600 million capital, 400 billion annually. Now, I think the global international development budget is about 150 billion-ish, around that. In order to deal with the SDGs, we're looking at something like 1.76 trillion. So, when we're talking about alternative finance, I want to put down a suggestion. Maybe we're not talking about alternative finance. What we're looking at is how do we get mainstream finance. The challenge isn't actually how do we pick up small amounts of small pennies. The problem is something systemic. Now, at the same time, we know both the international development budgets as well as the humanitarian budgets are now under pressure. They're all under pressure. And increasingly with the Trump government and various other things, the rise of national capitalism, as I call it, we're going to see effectively more pressure on these budgets. So there's something fundamental going on in actually the shortfall of capital that we're seeing. On the other hand, there is lots of capital that is looking for provision. So on the other hand, there's bubbles of capital floating around that are looking for, so there's a gap in the system. How do you bridge that capital? Often here, somebody will say, but this is about private capital, right? Often people will say, this is private capital versus public capital. And I end up having to say, look, I get the politics, but if we could just move the governance issue aside, if we talk about how we govern capital and move it into a different conversation, public capital, in order to raise taxes, take them all the way through by at the point of distribution, is something like about 43 pence in the dollar is consumed in the transaction cost to get the capital reallocated. 3 pence. So this idea of public and private capital, I think, and even governments end up borrowing money off large-scale public markets, private markets. So let's also just get rid of this illusion. I think there's a whole big conversation around governance, which I don't want to decry. I think we need to talk about governance in a whole new way. So that's step one of the conversation. So, in a way, what we know is that many of the international humanitarian and development aid budgets were built on a kind of ethics, human rights, an idea that every human had the right to actually be a fulfilled life, humanitarian principles, and so on. Actually, the reality is most NGOs are not able to do that. They talk about it, they all stand there, but the reality is no NGO can work on the basis of human rights. They work on the basis of contracted workflow. And that's absolutely the truth. They are contractors like UNDP is, like anyone else is. They can only do when they're contracted to work on it. Otherwise, they don't work. So there's another deep question that we end up having to ask ourselves. The morality that we've seen in the sector, where is it really coming from? And what is the governance of this new morality? I'm putting some real challenges down here. And in a way, I remember I was at a forum and this was actually a very interesting and very clever gentleman from the Norwegian Refugee Council who turned around and said, well, these are humanitarian principles. But the reality is that economic model no longer reflects them. Most NGOs are contracted as they are contracted even with a grant. Right? There's no grant, really. You have to deliver. So let's talk about this in an honest way. So in a sense, what we're seeing is kind of some complex issues come to the table. In a way, we have a financial capital limit. You know, I remember Alex and I spoke last time I was here, and we were talking about what we should do, and I was saying, we need a Marshall Fund. We don't need to crowdfund something. We need a whole new Marshall Fund. We need a scale of capital renewal and investment in order to renew some of the strategic issues that is never going to be solved by small amounts of crowdfunding. And so the first thing I want to do is, how do we start to raise our aspirations from going into small-scale prototyping and small-scale intervention to actually starting to talk about the right scale of change? Now it's interesting, in the time that you and I talked about Marshall Fund, actually Merkel has been now talking about it, and other people are starting to talk about it. It's interesting to see there's a whole different type of conversation starting to emerge. Secondly, in a way, much of the international, certainly humanitarian sector, was focused on what I would say is the capacity for eyeballs. If you could drive eyeballs into the Western economy, you could effectively get the crisis or the issue funded in some fashion. But that's also changing now, and there's a real issue in a way. And also the political limit. This is what I mean by the kind of rise of national capitalism, and then we have hit a political limit. And on top of that, kind of in a way, there's a sort of centralized limit, which is the idea of redistribution of growth has probably reached its kind of capacity limits. So if we talk about this, I suppose what I really want to frame out is that firstly, we have to start to imagine not alternative capital, but how do we build a whole mainstream market? To get from 150 billion to 1.76 trillion is not going to be alternative. This is going to be the first mainstream move. Now, at the same time, if you look at impact capital, it is nowhere near this. It's nowhere near this. I mean, Deloitte will write you lovely reports classifying every environmental investment into impact capital. But if you look at the actual impact capital markets, most of them are functioning on real estate investment or environmental services. So when you talk about this, I think we have to start to imagine bigger. This is my number one issue. And then we have to really talk about new types of capital structures, which I think more and more, if you look at stuff like catastrophe bonds, even if you look at GDP-linked investment models, so almost doing an outcome-based financing model based on GDP growth, I think you're going to look at whole new large-scale capital structures. And that's going to be fundamental to development. So I think there's a kind of whole issue that's coming around insurance. And let's also not forget, I mean, the Great Fire of London gave birth to the insurance industry. And the insurance industry thereby drove regulation in the UK. It wasn't the public sector. It was the whole idea of actually insurance. And insurance will be a key player in the international development market. Thank you. So when we sort of talk about this, I think more and more we're going to have to talk about it in a different way. So one of the big things I talk about is that we have to get away from this idea of human rights, but talk about interdependency. You have to understand interdependent risks and system risks. And so when you look at system risks and system opportunities, you start to map the problem differently. You don't see it as I'm just gifting something to somebody, but you see it as actually there's a mutual benefit in the story. And that's in reality, even if you look at Justin Trudeau, who's hailed as the hero of the West at this moment in time, he has not changed anything in terms of actually international aid. It is still part of actually the trade and the defense story. It's still a full stack story. So see what's going on. We're seeing this in a fundamentally different way. And in a way, we are looking at new investment vehicles. So my big conversation here, and I don't have much time, is that I don't think we need to be talking about new alternative markets. We have to be talking about building a mainstream market for international development and building it in a way that is actually of the right scale and order fundamentally. And I think the challenge from us is that we've all been seduced to think through small-scale prototyping. NHS wasn't built through a prototype. Universal basic income will not be built through small-scale prototypes. They're large-scale complex problems. And in reality, it will be a large-scale transformation. So when you look at any of these big-scale stuff, I think maybe we've been seduced by startup methodologies and mythologies, which is you build a small prototype and you test it and vary it. But actually, societal transformation maybe has a different minimum viable product and has a different economic engine. I don't know what it is, but I want to put it down to you that maybe we need to start to think differently. And I think the challenge we're sitting on is actually, and this is my addressing UNDP, is that organizations like UNDP and the UN structures as a whole have an opportunity to go big or go home. And I think that's where we'll be sitting soon. Either we go big to solve the relevant issues, or actually we'll start to diminish in terms of our political capability to drive the change that's required. And I think the world is almost ready to hear, but we have to tell it differently. We have to talk about systems risks, systems opportunities. We have to comprehend interdependency risks in a whole new way. And that's already starting to happen. In the UK, for example, I know that conversation happened of looking at its international aid budget as part of its systems risk profile and starting to re-understand it through a completely different model. So I think there's a whole stack to redeveloping the story. And in a way, I think what we're about to see is this. As the preventative economy starts to become the key issue, development will become more significant than humanitarian aid funding. And I think, and also predictive capital, predictive financing is going to be very, very key in being able to drive that transition. So I think with that, I will end there, but that was just to give you a scale of the challenge. So it's not alternative. We need to build mainstream. And with that, I'll carry on. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You are inspiring as always. În continuare, aș vrea să-l prezint pe domnul Vyacheslav Kuniov, care a reușit să îmbine cu succes o carieră atât în domeniul finanțelor cât și în domeniul IT. Dumnealui are o experiență vastă în ambele domenii și dacă ar fi să-l numim în câteva cuvinte, este un vizionar.
Поскольку времени мало, я сразу, значит, пока мне здесь помогает технологически, значит, я вкратце представлю два проекта, один имеющий непосредственное отношение к нашей теме, другой несколько опосредованное отношение, но тем не менее меня попросили о нем рассказать, поэтому я расскажу. Первый вопрос ко всем. Все знают, что такое блокчейн? Кто не знает, что такое блокчейн? Поднимите руку. Смотрите, когда я буду говорить, это очень важный момент, и вообще важно об этом узнать. Блокчейн – это один из элементов четвертой промышленной революции, одна из ключевых технологий. Ее основное преимущество заключается в том, что это одноранговая база данных, где любой факт, любая транзакция фиксируется одновременно на многих тысячах компьютеров в мире. Соответственно, стереть ее или отказаться от нее невозможно. То есть, если я вот с молодым человеком сделал сделку, продал ему квартиру, и мы зафиксировали это с помощью технологии блокчейн, ни он, ни я не сможем отказаться от этого факта. Вот это основное достоинство. И когда такая технология появилась, на ней сделана масса криптовалют, например, биткоин сделан на технологии блокчейн. Это оказалось ключевой технологией, когда отношения переходят от централизованных систем к системам peer-to-peer, когда мы можем работать напрямую друг с другом. И на самом деле самой важной валютой становится, знаете что? Как по-вашему?
Доверие.
Доверие, да. То есть я считаю, и это мое самое большое убеждение в том, что мы переходим в технологию в эру, когда будут самыми главными это технология доверия. И вот сейчас я вам презентую такой проект. Этот проект делают наши коллеги-украинцы, мы в определенной степени участвуем в них. Это платежная система, которая полностью основана на технологии доверия. Называется она Geo. Так, сейчас я разберусь, как здесь управлять. Ага. Вот, это децентрализованная кредитная одноранговая сеть. Так, я прошу прощения. Показывает, да? Все показывает, да. Одноразовая сеть, где люди работают напрямую друг с другом. В чем смысл заключается этой сети? Мне здесь каждый раз бьет током, я не знаю почему. Может, я очень важные вещи говорю. Смысл заключается в том, что в рамках этой системы можно оплачивать мы можем оплачивать друг другу за товары и услуги через доверие. То есть мы передаем друг другу столько, тот факт, насколько мы доверяем друг другу. Смысл заключается в том, что вот если нас здесь есть трое, да, то каждый устанавливает, кому и насколько он доверяет. Вот, допустим, мы лично знакомы, вот я вот с девушкой знаком, да, я ей говорю, что моя линия доверия есть $100, а она мне доверяет только на $50. Что это? И так каждый из нас, когда он заходит, всем, кого он знает, всему своему ближнему кругу, он указывает лимиты доверия. Да? То есть, что это означает? Что в случае, если этот человек не выполнит на себя эти взятые на себя обязательства, вы просто за него заплатите. Но это ваш самый близкий друг. Это ваши родственники, члены семьи и так далее и тому подобное. Соответственно, вы понимаете, что эти люди, зная, что расплатились в рамках их обязательств, да, в рамках их доверия, они, скорее всего, выполнят взятые на себя обязательства. Но, тем не менее, мы все с вами знаем теорию 6 рукопожатий, да, что мы через 6 рукопожатий знаем, в принципе, все. Поэтому, как только в такой системе появляется, эта система, она сделана по технологии 5 рукопожатий. Оказывается, этого достаточно для любой страны. То есть, если сделать сеть на подобном принципе, то мы полностью можем покрывать через эти линии доверия оплаты любых сервисов и услуг с нулевыми рисками. Вот это самый главный момент. И основной валютой становится доверие, но которое номинируется в какой-то валюте. То есть его можно номинировать в леях, в долларах или еще в чем-то. Вы можете указать, вот как я сказал, доверяю на $100, да? Или доверяю еще. То есть это не просто доверие абстрактно, а это конкретное доверие, выраженное в деньгах. Кстати, вот этих украинцев было очень интересно, что когда они запустили эту систему, пилотный проект, то вначале все друг другу ставили максимум, условно до $1000 доверяли. Очень быстро, в течение пары недель, все опустились на реальные цифры. Потому что все понимали, что за это придется отвечать. Если что, надо вытащить эти деньги из своего кармана и заплатить. То есть вот вы вначале устанавливаете связи со своим ближайшим окружением. Партнеры, друзья, сотрудники и так далее. Вы можете доверять, кстати, не только физическим лицам, но и организациям. Вы можете сказать, я этой организации, этому бренду доверяю на такие-то суммы. То есть в данном случае это не важно. И вот в результате выстраиваются вот такие вот связи доверия. Видите? И поэтому, если С нужно заплатить Б, и у него нет прямой линии, то всегда через кого-то можно просчитать и можно найти ту линию доверия, с помощью которой можно оплатить. Что здесь как бы революционно и принципиально важно? Что вот это все, оно не требует физических денег в течение оплаты. Вот эта система может месяц действовать, ни одного там реального доллара, лея в этот момент не нужно. Да? То есть в тех странах, в которых есть большие проблемы с дефицитом оборотных средств, да, вот и у людей с дефицитом оборотных средств, они в результате могут достаточно длительное время функционировать в рамках вот такой системы доверия. Это, кстати, ничего нового нет. В деревнях там 100-200 лет назад была система записи. Там в амбарной книге писали, кто кому что должен. А здесь это просто записывается в рамках такой системы. И вот система Гео, она просто автоматически отслеживает эти цепочки осуществления платежа и осуществляет платеж. И выясняет, вот видите, все друг другу по-разному доверяют. И вычисляется тот путь, в рамках которого можно оплатить ваши обязательства. То есть, если оно у вас, скажем, там $200, то таких цепочек нет. А вот если $70, то цепочку можно найти. Понятно, да? То есть, если вы хотите сделать очень большой платеж, то вы просто не найдете такую цепочку. Да? Ну, то есть, тут ключевой момент, если вам не доверяют на такую сумму. То есть, если никого нет, кто вам доверяет на $1000, принципиально невозможно найти, чтобы вам оплатили это. Поэтому вы начинаете очень ответственно жить. Понимаете? То есть вот это ключевой момент. На самом деле вы начинаете очень серьезно относиться к своим обязательствам. То есть к обязательствам банка мы, условно говоря, можем отнестись так прохладно. Ну ладно, не в этом банке, в другом банке. Им нужны новые клиенты, я пойду туда. Или одолжил у этого человека, ну ладно, не отдал ему, пошел к другому родственнику. Здесь так не получится. Вы один раз не выполнили свои обязательства, это сразу видят, и вам перестает доверять. Это полностью децентрализованная кредитная система, она работает по принципу peer-to-peer, поскольку мало времени, я уберу все эти вот технологические части. Что здесь важно? Во-первых, никто не владеет всей информацией. То есть нет централизованной системы, где известно, кто, кому, когда, чего платил. Всегда есть только текущее состояние. Можно при необходимости сделать так, чтобы эта информация где-то накапливалась, если, допустим, государство хочет контролировать. Но в принципе, если никому контролировать не надо, то у каждого на телефоне только его текущее состояние и его текущие обязательства. И ничего больше. Вот, как я сказал, вот это сохраняется только последний баланс. То есть все время в системе у каждого на телефоне его последний баланс. Его последние обязательства, кому чего он должен. Нет никакого растущего реестра, там, каких-то больших баз данных, нет истории, ничего этого нет. Есть ваше текущее состояние. И в какой-то момент вы выходите на... Вот это доверие будет отражать вашу степень ответственности перед всем миром. Самое главное, какие возможности здесь есть? То есть, во-первых, эта система, она комплементарна к фиатным валютам. Кому интересно, я потом об этом расскажу, что это. Система клиринга абсолютно приватна. То есть нет, как я сказал, по умолчанию устроенной системы, где все это обслеживается. Можно подключить условно национальный банк, но только если это потребуется. Да? Платформа работает в рамках peer-to-peer, то есть каждый раз взаимодействие напрямую. Это запросто может работать как платформа кредитования. И что важно, у нас нет денег, пока мы работаем, пока не прошел общий клиринг. У нас нет банков, у нас нет суды денег и, соответственно, нет судного процента. Вот с чем я согласен с, скажем так, с азиатским представлением или арабским представлением, как правильно сказать, что процент это зло. Но это моя личная позиция. Я понимаю, что все существующие экономисты в европейской системе скажут, что я этот еретик. Я считаю, что процент это зло. Вспомните еще год назад у нас кредит можно было получить только по 25% годовых. Какой бизнес можно сделать по 25% годовых? Вернее, я знаю какой, но мне кажется, это не самый хороший вид бизнеса, которым можно заниматься. При инфляции там около нулевой, бизнес 25% годовых. То есть у вас прибыль должна быть от 50 до 70%. Да? Ну вот что можно делать в Молдове с гарантированной прибылью от 50 до 70%? Назовите мне. Ну только если вы не сидите на чем-то монопольном. Да? Да. И они уже ничего не делают. Вот. Поэтому вот здесь вот это два ключевых момента, что это беспроцентно, что это без комиссий. Да, комиссии берутся только в момент вывода денег. Да, вывода денег реальных. И, ну и так далее. Ладно, в общем, здесь я больше не буду об этом говорить. Кому интересно, я потом расскажу, потому что у меня осталось 5 минут, а я должен успеть еще вам одну презентацию показать. Вы могли бы мне здесь помочь? Да. Вот такой проект есть в Украине, это реальный пилот, и у меня большая мечта запустить в Молдове такой же аналогичный пилот. И вот если среди сидящих здесь есть те, кто могут в этом помочь или хотя бы порассуждать со мной на эту тему, я открыт для этого обсуждения. На мой взгляд, Молдова, вот у Украины колоссальные инфраструктурные проблемы для запуска такого проекта. Я считаю, что в Молдове инфраструктурных есть. В Молдове есть только проблема в некоторых головах. То есть если мы с вами эту проблему решим, то вполне можно запустить подобные проекты, и для падающей экономики это просто супер. И здесь я хочу сказать большое спасибо Организации Объединенных Наций, которая поддерживает вот такие инновационные проекты. И в частности они поддержали инновационный проект, первый в Молдове инновационный проект, связанный с блокчейном. И сейчас моя компания реализует вот такой проект в Организации Объединенных Наций на технологии блокчейн. Подчеркиваю, это первый официальный блокчейн-проект в Молдове. То есть мы получаем этот опыт, я надеюсь, государство к этому опыту присмотрится. Этот проект связан с управлением парком автомобилей. Вот полное его название UN Fleet Management. А смысл заключается в том, что есть Организация Объединенных Наций, у нее есть много офисов, UNDP, ЮНИСЕФ, ЮНЕСКО, у них есть там какие-то там проекты, у всех есть автомобили, все ими пользуются, друг у друга их арендуют, и это колоссальная проблема. Это очень сложно, иногда некоторые не выполняют взятые на себя обязательства, все это очень сложно. И вот мы приняли решение попробовать автоматизировать этот вопрос с использованием технологии блокчейна, где мы за счет блокчейна реализуем несколько важных функций. Первая функция — неотрекаемость. То есть если вы это сделали, уже невозможно никого попросить нам стереть где-то данные там, или еще сделать, что я этого не делал, я это не сделал. Вы заказали, вы должны за это отвечать. Второе — это возможность внешнего мониторинга. То есть подобным системам технологии блокчейн можно подключиться снаружи, условно офис Организации Объединенных Наций в Нью-Йорке может это спокойно снаружи мониторить, не опасаясь, что при этом утекут какие-то конфиденциальные данные. Эта технология тоже это обеспечивает. И полная транспарентность его процесса. Вот. И я опять-таки очень быстро пробегусь. Значит, сейчас основные проблемы — это абсолютно хаотичная коммуникация, крайне неэффективное использование текущего автопарка, зависимость от того, насколько, назовем так, вменяемые водители и насколько они четко выполняют свои обязанности. Очень сложное создание такой сложной цепочки. Например, когда встречается миссия, да? Надо встретить там одного человека, в другом месте встретить другого человека, потом вместе пересадить на большую машину, чтобы отвезти, ну и так далее. То есть вот это все сейчас сделать это сложно. И вот наша задача — это привести в другой вариант, когда это все происходит исключительно в электронном виде, прозрачно, и ни у кого нет возможности некорректно воздействовать на этот процесс. Да. Вот это как должно быть, вот эта идеальная картинка, когда, собственно, сейчас я попытаюсь нажать здесь на правильную кнопку. Нет. Не знаю, как здесь. В общем, смысл в том, что вот эта центральная система, и все делается в ней. То есть человека как такового там нет. Вот. И я очень надеюсь, что мы в ближайшее время есть только администратор, который наблюдает за непосредственно работой с системой. И основные плюсы, которые будут в рамках тестирования технологии: во-первых, понять, насколько ее, не то что трудоемко, но какие возникают вопросы при имплементации подобной технологии, прежде всего блокчейн. Во-вторых, мы хотим показать, что это открытая платформа, которую можно расширять. Кстати, одно из его развитий, которое мы обсуждаем с Организацией Объединенных Наций, это вопрос потом распространения подобной технологии на муниципальные предприятия. Вот если мы берем Кишинев, да, у него много муниципальных предприятий. У них есть спецтехника, ну там краны различные, да, там большие какие-то грузовики и так далее. Вот с помощью этой системы можно на порядке повысить эффективность использования этой техники, когда она будет вот так вот арендоваться друг у друга, но прозрачно, абсолютно прозрачно. То есть будет общий реестр и будет видно, что этот заказал. И здесь ключевой момент, что по концу периода все друг другу должны заплатить деньги за использование. И вот в рамках этой системы абсолютно транспарентно и прозрачно выставляются эти счета, кто кому сколько должен. Осуществляется глобальный клиринг, и оказывается, скажем, что если у вас было 30 организаций, то в конце только 2 организации должны заплатить 3 организациям, и все. То есть представьте, какое сокращение вообще с точки зрения счетов, там, актов выполненных работ, взаимодействий и так далее. Вот я надеюсь, что в следующем году я вам буду рассказывать о том, как это уже работает. Все, благодарю вас за внимание, я прошу прощения, очень мало времени. Если кому будет интересно, можете потом задать вопрос.
Deci, în continuare, aș vrea să vă prezint pe al treilea vorbitor din cadrul blocului tematic Finanțarea neconvențională. Este vorba despre Dumitru Vasilescu, care are o experiență vastă de 8 ani în cadrul turnurilor la funcție de manager de proiect. Dumitru are în palmaresul său mai multe inițiative cu privire la inovația în afaceri. Din câte am înțeles, pasiunile lui cele mai mari în domeniul profesional sunt obiectivele de dezvoltare durabilă și, nu în ultimul rând, finanțarea alternativă. Dumitru Vasilescu.
Mersi foarte mult. Sper că se aude bine. Eu o să încerc să vorbesc în română de data asta, mult un vorbitor în engleză, unul în rus și unul în română. Deci eu vreau să vă prezint, sper rapid în 10 minute, deci un proiect care de fapt a trecut oarecum deja de fază de pilot, a fost botezat și este în plină implementare. Eu nu știu câți din cei prezenți aici au încercat, au făcut deja crowdfunding sau careva experiență de crowdfunding, poate puteți să ridicați mâna. Deci pentru noi la fel a fost o inițiativă absolut nouă, chiar dacă, așa cum am să vă explic, de fapt nu am vrut să facem crowdfunding în sensul restrict, deci strict. Noi am văzut foarte clar o provocare interesantă, importantă, care este pe piață la noi, mai ales resimțită de cei care au copii, școli și grădinițe, și nu doar. Și această provocare în temei ține de faptul că copiii în principiu în Republica Moldova consumă foarte puține fructe în stare proastă. Datele OMS-ului de fapt vorbesc că consumul este în jur de 60% din minimul necesar de fructe în stare proaspătă pe zi. Și este o provocare care a fost, de fapt, au fost câteva încercări de a soluționa această provocare. Să știți că din cei ce noi am învățat în proces, nu este în niciun caz doar o problemă de bani. Deci experiența ultimilor, să spunem, 10 ani demonstrează că problema banilor, de fapt, este o problemă secundară. Când noi vorbim de consumul de fructe în rândul copiilor, în școlile și grădinițele publice. Primele, posibil, două probleme mari, două provocări mari sunt lipsa unei culturi, clar, se vede, este o lipsă a culturii consumului. Și doi, și aici este și o întrebare care vizează și nu deci Programul Național de Indirect, este faptul că sectorul privat oarecum nu este conectat la această provocare și nici de cum nu este antrenat în a o soluționa de o manieră durabilă, de o manieră de lungă durată. Deci, cu alte cuvinte, ce este aici pe acest slide este, noi avem o situație în care avem școli, o situație în care avem, de fapt, o sumedenie de companii producătoare de fructe. Avem în principiu multe persoane, organizații, instituții care au susținut și pot susține și încuraja inclusiv în plan financiar rezolvarea acestei provocări și avem și expertiză și parteneri și diverse experiențe din regiuni care deci, aduc exemple concrete cum problema dată, cum provocarea dată poate fi rezolvată. Revenind la subiectul deci prezentării mele, noi noi am încercat în echipă, este și Otilia, colega mea, și de proiect, noi am încercat să utilizăm de fapt instrumentul numit crowdfunding pentru a obține două lucruri. Unul este pentru a conecta de fapt școlile, copiii, părinții la sectorul privat și sectorul privat la școli și a închide într-un fel acest cerc, astfel încât într-un an, doi, sperăm să nu mai fie nevoie de intervenția IUPNUD-ului. Unul și doi, cum vă spuneam, deci noi am vrut să mobilizăm ceva resurse financiare ca să pornim toată mașinăria dată, să demonstrăm într-un fel că este posibil acest lucru. Evident, Indi anterior a spus despre problema acestor experimente, într-un fel, dar și soluții de scară mică, care noi încercăm să implementăm, să vedem dacă funcționează și apoi credem cu toți că lucrul ăsta va funcționa. Eu personal trebuie să admit faptul că continui să cred că pentru anumite provocări această cale a experimentelor de fapt este unica modalitate. Pentru că, din păcate, uitați-vă, noi am avut cel puțin 3 sau 4 reprize sau încercări de a avea un program național, de scară națională, de asigurare a copiilor și școli și grădinițe cu lucruri de stare proastă. Toate au ieșuat. Au ieșuat din vari motive, dar cred eu, unul din motivele de bază este faptul că oamenii, de fapt, nu au validat. Utilizatorul final nu a validat ideea. Deci nu a fost o validare ce anume, cum a soluției, a ideii propuse. În procesul de organizare și implementare a campaniei de crowdfunding, noi, de fapt, într-adevăr, ne-am ciocnit tocmai din nou de această problemă, când a face un crowdfunding pe idei sau pe un concept este mult, mult mai greu decât a face o mobilizare de fonduri pe un produs sau pe un prototip de produs. De ce? Pentru că, vă dați seama, repet, am spus mai sus, noi avem o problemă mare de cultură de consum, cum zis, și avem o mare problemă că sectorul privat oricum nu este interesat și nu este conectat în proces. Respectiv, noi am făcut această campanie, am scos-o în capăt, am mobilizat un pic peste cei ce noi ne-am planificat inițial. Am reușit la momentul actual, chiar astăzi și așa zilnic, au loc deja livrări ale produsului nostru în 4 școli la moment. Peste 3.000 de copii primesc produsul absolut gratuit. Produsul, de fapt, constă în ceea ce este sau a fost patentat cam circa 10 ani în urmă în Statele Unite. Este vorba de simpla gustare de măr până când, în stare proaspăt, măr care este gata pentru că este filiat, este gata pentru a fi consumat, în o doză de 80 de grame. Și livrările la moment deja sunt, noi am făcut câteva trial-uri. Am învățat copiilor, de fapt, îmi place foarte mult produsul, este foarte atractiv, ușor de consumat, fun. Noi sperăm foarte mult, de fapt, repet, ideea inițială de a valida această schemă, deci este ca să includem cât mai mulți copii, deci și instituțiile de învățământ în acest, ceea ce numim experiment, de scară mică, și ne interesează foarte mult, inclusiv să auzim dacă aveți și voi careva sugestii, păreri, ne-ar interesa evident foarte mult cum noi am putea să aducem la scară mult mai mare ideea dată. Cam asta cred din partea mea. Mersi mult dacă aveți câteva întrebări, să răspund.
Să păstrăm sesiunea de întrebări și răspunsuri pentru pauza de cafea. Mai avem un vorbitor. Dumitru, mulțumesc mult încă o dată pentru un exemplu tangibil despre cum crowdfunding-ul poate, de fapt, folosi nu doar atât cauzelor sociale, cât și pentru dezvoltarea sectorului de afaceri. Următorul vorbitor este Andrei Aido. Dumnealui este de mai bine de 15 ani director și fondator al Systems și a reușit să îmbine, cred eu, cu succes strategia de dezvoltare explozivă a companiei prin niște parteneriate stabile, inclusiv cu sectorul public. Și dumnealui, o secundă.
Bună ziua, hello everybody. Vă rog, eu nu pot vorbi așa de bine limba română, eu trec din mea nativă rusă. Я хочу вам рассказать о нашем опыте. Презентация будет на английском, кому удобнее читать, говорить я буду по-русски. Инновации для публичного сектора. Пару слов о нашей компании. 15 лет нашей компании. Мы производим программное обеспечение для финансового сектора, банки, почты, системы денежных переводов, правительства и тому подобное. У нас 25 человек, и мы экспортируем наши технологии во многие страны. Почему инновация? Это наш смысл жизни. Мы стараемся все, что мы делаем, делать новые продукты, новые сервисы, и каждый год-два запускаем что-то новенькое. На этой схеме представлены разные продукты и сервисы, которые мы запускали в Молдове. Многие из них на банковском секторе знакомы, но вот выделены красным, желтеньким цветом. Это две инновации, которые мы запустили для публичного сектора. Одна из них в 2012 году – это процессинговый единый центр платежей в пользу государства МП. Да. До того, как мы внедрили, система платежей выглядела вот так где-то в Молдове. Для того, чтобы оплатить несколько каких-то там государственных сервисов, надо бегать было сначала за бумажками, получать, потом бегать искать, где их можно заплатить, потом эти бумажки относить назад и тому подобное. Вот. На то время у нас работал коммерческий вариант новой системы. Мы предложили нашу инновацию, которая свелась к одному простому универсальному правилу. Любой платеж любого бенефициара можно заплатить везде, любым легальным способом на территории страны. Вот за эту задачу взялся МП, его внедрили и запустили в Молдове. Реальная схема выглядит чуть-чуть посложнее, чем принципиальная схема, но здесь показан и элемент клиринга, когда впервые в Молдове бюджетные средства начали поступать день в день на счета в Минфине, и ни один платеж не ускользнул, не потерян, на момент внедрения, тогда только по-моему, по штрафам полиции было найдено около 20 миллионов леев, пролеживающих в банках из-за причины неправильных реквизитов, указанных в платежах. Минфин был очень счастлив найти 20 миллионов, конечно, вот, и МП ему понравился. В этом отношении. Сегодня, наверное, многие знают, что это. С нашей точки зрения, я не очень разбираюсь в публичном секторе, конечно, что значит альтернативное финансирование, кроме налогов, не очень понимаю, но для меня сокращение издержек публичного сектора и есть финансирование. Это экономит наши деньги, как налогоплательщиков, и мы надеемся, государство будет их использовать более эффективно. Некоторые бенефиты этого проекта были выражены в интервью тех участников, которые его внедряли. Вообще мне этот проект показался уникальным. Здесь сидят тоже люди, которые принимали участие в его внедрении. И оказалось так, что в Молдове вообще сотрудничество — это, я знаю многих инвесторов, которые не дают денег здесь, если цепочка больше 2-3 человек. Если надо договариваться 3 молдаванам, денег не дают. Здесь удалось договориться, начиная с Мирового банка, канцелярии правительства, Национальному банку и тому подобное, с министерствами, Минфином, банками, и создать общий проект, который оказался выгоден всем. И вот высказывания этих людей это подтверждают. Сегодня мы делаем некоторые новые вещи, подключаем к МП, это нотифицирование и возможность оплаты через мобильные телефоны, что открывает новую возможность для молдавских граждан, живущих за границей, осуществлять кросс-бордерные платежи. Не надо ехать сюда, не надо даже иметь, может быть, карточки, и можно будет оплатить, находясь за границей. Что дальше мы для публичного сектора видим как развитие МП в части экономии публичных средств и повышения эффективности публичного управления. За счет подключения к МП, как уже состоявшейся инфраструктуры коммерческих платежей, таких как коммунальные, социальные платежи, e-commerce и тому подобное, то мы можем насытить МП большим количеством транзакций коммерческого сектора, которые сами за себя будут платить. Сегодня МП оплачивается полностью Минфином, то есть из бюджета. За счет подключения коммерческих игроков цена транзакции для бюджета мы приблизим к нулю. При этом надеемся, что поддержат и национальные банки, и все регуляторные органы, для того, чтобы те, кто платит без бумаги, электронным способом, не платили никаких комиссий. И те, кто использует безналичный способ оплаты, получали бы себе еще вознаграждение за то, что они этим пользуются. То есть, если вы платите фактуру безналичным способом, вы там 50 бань или лей будете получать себе назад. Не с вас комиссию брать, а будете получать назад. Вот это как такой, может быть, инновационный, революционный способ финансирования экономии бюджетных средств. Следующий проект, о котором я хотел сказать, это другое направление нашей деятельности. Мы занимаемся на рынке денежных переводов. У нас есть глобальный процессинговый центр, который позволяет международные денежные переводы. Вы знаете, что в Молдове это 1,2 миллиарда получают из-за границы. И сегодня они напрямую работают с банками здесь. Что это значит? Это значит, никто не видит, не понимает, не знает, по каким правилам системы осуществляют этот бизнес. Да, они регистрируются в Национальном банке, но каждый день, выдавая порядка 4 миллионов долларов в кассах банков, никто не знает, по каким правилам работают эти системы. Мы отдали на аутсорс этот поток денег. Ну так во всех странах. Это и anti-money laundering, и противодействие терроризму осуществляется тоже на их стороне. Мы совместно с консорциуме с Корейским финансовым интервенционным институтом клиринга внедряем, подписали договор с Центральным банком Армении и внедряем национальный такой гейтвей для подключения всех систем денежных переводов в страну. Это грандиозный шаг, первый шаг на построении ACH такой есть, Automatic Clearing House внутри страны, когда те деньги, которые приходят и уходят из страны, мониторятся и могут быть более эффективно использованы Национальным банком и Министерством финансов. Это один из проектов, который нужен практически любой стране. Еще я хотел бегло остановиться на третьем проекте. Он такой тоже очень интересный, инновационный. Это украинская система гуртом, правильно говорится, да. Это такое некоторое сочетание краудфандинга и комплементарных валют. Идея простая, вы знаете, война на востоке Украины, надо восстанавливать школы, надо поддерживать детей и тому подобное. Деньги там расплываются, они неучтенные, никто не знает, как это делать. Была построена система на основе блокчейна, и в которой в одну цепочку завязаны доноры, волонтеры и бизнес. То есть те, кто что-то вкладывает. Доноры вкладывают деньги, волонтеры свою работу, бизнес дает продукты, какие-то стройматериалы и тому подобное. Все транзакции учитываются в блокчейне, и комплементарная валюта ОМ позволяет учитывать эти взаиморасчеты между собой. Тем самым эта экономика возрождения востока Украины работает без того, чтобы туда были каким-то государственным способом выделены какие-то фонды, ну и благополучно как разворованы, как обычно. Вот такое использование новых технологий позволяет решать социальные и общественные задачи, не прибегая к публичному финансированию. да, создавая такие подсистемы. Вот, я вложился.
Stimați participanți ai blocului tematic Finanțare neconvențională, lucrările pe care am putut să le ascultăm au fost deja ascultate, audiate. Vă invităm acum la o scurtă pauză tehnică pentru că urmează atelierul tematic. De asemenea, vreau să profit de ocazie să reiterez faptul că puteți să adresați întrebările și să socializați cu invitații noștri în cadrul pauzei de cafea și puteți asculta o prezentare în hall. Este vorba despre un coleg, un partener din cadrul Astana Hub Kazakhstan, care va vorbi despre un program regional de granturi pentru inovații. În același timp, vreau să vă invit să rămâneți după aceste 15 minute de pauză de cafea pentru atelierul tematic, unde vom avea o îmbinare a teoriei pe care am ascultat-o, a teoriilor pe care le-am ascultat mai devreme, cu aspectele practice. Și chiar dacă unii din voi ați fost înregistrați în prealabil sau alții nu s-au înregistrat în prealabil pentru atelierul de lucru propriu-zis, vă îndemn să rămâneți pentru că suntem un număr care ne permite. Și după 15 minute vă așteptăm înapoi. Vă mulțumesc! Cum vede dumnealui lucrul de mai departe?
Hello, hi. Okay, you've heard enough from outside people. I'd really like to hear from you. And in a way, the reason why we broke the tables up is that actually, firstly, I want you to have a chat about, if you talk about this idea of alternative investment and alternative financing and this future, kind of systems future that we've been talking about, I'd love you to have a discussion at the table. Firstly, privately, I'm going to give you, every one of you 5 minutes to think what are the 3 conversations that you think you'd like to have. 3 conversations each one of you would like to have, and put them on a post-it note. So I've given you all post-it notes. If you split them up, you can all, please, help yourself. And the 3 conversations you'd like to have. And if you start with that, I'm going to give you 5 minutes. What are the 3 things you found interesting, challenging, disagreed with? 3 conversations you'd like to have. You'd like to have personally. So if you just, as part of a table, as part of this next hour. Okay, no, it's fine. So if you write on, so there's been several talks that have been going on as part of finance. So I'm really interested in just hearing what are the 3 or 4 challenges that you think are important to raise, so we can all start to have that as part of the group. There's been lots of talks. Yeah, sorry, I was just referring to the group. So. Could be with climates, could be any of the conversations you want. Financial inclusion, inclusive growth.
How much time do they need for this?
5 minutes.
Ok, thank you. În 5 minute, da? Aveți 5 minute.
Poza mелкий. Я не один кадр.
Just to be provocative, you could also talk about how, for example, the central clearing system that was put together for international financing or international clearances for remittances, for example, what would that do to a government? Well, how much power would that give to a government? Suddenly it's able to see every remittance that's going into the system. Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Should it have been decentralized? Should it have been centralized? By centralizing, what risk do we create? Like genuinely any of the questions, there were some really interesting provocations in there. So in an underwriting, so a blockchain underwriting system, how much is my underwriting worth versus somebody else's underwriting? Like suddenly you can have different, almost pricing for some of this stuff as well. You can price the risk of default. Like there's really interesting things coming off the table. Yeah, have we got some? One, you can get one. Yeah, a good one is fine as well.
What to do with this?
Yeah, I'll tell you that. Are we done?
Choose
Yeah.
3 for the whole day.
Yeah. But I'll talk about that. Because I think sometimes when you use normal logic, okay. Are we ready? I think sort of the level of chat is going up. So what about, I mean, how about this? I find what's interesting about all the blockchain technologies is nobody talks about how you build a community. Exactly. Because actually that's, I mean, if you do crowdfunding, your real challenge isn't the technology, it's the people. And everyone thinks, and that's the most difficult bit, actually, seeding these systems is quite difficult. So it's kind of interesting. So, like, I think the people bit, there we are. Okay. Okay, so some of you, if you carry on writing, please carry on writing. Yeah, so what I would suggest is now every table, actually start discussing round one by one what you think you should discuss, what each of you ideas you put on. Now, typically in discussions, yeah, this is what happens. You have this kind of natural bell curve where you get one idea which is very dominant and you get all the other ideas which are either poles. I want you to be very conscious of that. So you'll have a dominant idea, look for the weak ideas that sit on either side, and be conscious of having a debate about those weak ideas. Because sometimes the dominant ideas are dead ideas. They're over-discussed. But actually the weak ideas are actually the more interesting ones. So at a table, yeah, you could join. I think we're really going to do that. I think it'd be a richer table. But now we have the real competition. One has just hosts the ideas, so that actually...
This is what we're doing.
Perfect. If you pick one person that hosts the ideas,
Implicare one.
you've sat the right way.
Privat. Private provision of public service.
În sensul sectorului privat.
Word. Instead of private, use independent.
Independent. Okay, good.
It just changes our perception of what we need. Sometimes by using the word private, we get prejudice before we even understood the meaning. Yeah.
So your transparency, like one shows some transparency. So transparency is not chain of one. It's another.
Your big thing. I'm going to give you some big paper. Because your thinking looks like it's shaky.
Eso es que nos ayuda a hacer lengua inglesa phasing out. Eliminar.
In what way?
State
So, just a quick thing. When people discuss ideas, they tend to right? So the dominant idea will kill everything else around. Will kill everything. So whenever you're having discussion, now look for the ideas that everyone else is rather than everyone else. Like let's focus on the rest of
Что-то din domeniul scrie alternative independente, da? Dar să punem pe aici la independent.
That's easily go. We got it.
Identifying the needs.
That's about
The obvious needs. Bine, dar când spui foarte foarte că nu e privat, e unde? Nu, cât sectorul public, cât sectorul privat. Asta e o discuție. Dar identifying the needs of public and alternative health service provision. Cumva sectorul să decidă eu nu știu, poate trebuie, dar trebuie în manieră mai rog. Only two of them are. No, one is. Care vă spun și eu și getting rid of cash, cash is Vrei să lăgești baza. You want to broaden the basis of those who are responsible. Okay, scrie broadening the base. Nu știu, ideea este să fie și prin politici, posibil.
Social, all comes under free access. Social inclusion, ID inclusion is actually one of the website for that's the most ideas. Then we've got blockchain, stakeholders one, expected one as well, and then we've got the risks, so it's actually crime, risks, of course, it's capital risks.
Come reformare in inglese? Broadening the base, involvement in solving without government change.
No sense of real change, just a sense of change.
Metode totalitară. Motive. Noi. Sunteți sigură că metodele pozitive de a motiva? Nu vă spărați. Speranța mea era nu perioada a obliga, voi credeți în liberație, libertăți. Pentru că dacă spunem, forțăm, da, suntem de la Departamentul Instituțiilor Penitenciare. Fundația Dezvoltării gândirii totalitare.
So actually, so, but I mean, just don't buy into like there is new centralization in blockchain. It's not, yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Do we need more public sector?
2 more minutes?
Oh, we need the support.
No, I want to make sure everyone's had a chance to speak. 2 more minutes?
Everybody presented his idea and wait for the latest news. Claiming.
Too high. Okay. So.
No,
Okay. Got 2 more. Okay. We have 2 more minutes.
Yeah, so what we're going to do is very simple. We're going to keep Nick progressing on social tomorrow. We'll use the risks are education, the lack of business, and corruption. Actually, because of social actually, that's what
Okay, our friends over there are going to present first, and then followed by yourself. So, yeah, blockchain.
Just a second. Ca să mă asigur, are nevoie cineva de traducere? Dumneavoastră aveți nevoie de traducere, da? Mai este cineva care are nevoie de traducere? Ok, perfect. I will ask you to speak over the phone. The microphone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Hello, everybody. We have here a small but very diverse team, and the topics proposed for further discussion, in my understanding, they go beyond what we have listened to in the presentations, in the presentation sessions. Basically, the members of this team want to discuss financial inclusion through blockchain, crowdfunding for blockchain, personal financial inclusion. It's another one, basically in line with the first one. Then phasing out double taxation as a mean for financing public sector. I think it's quite a challenging topic. Okay. Yeah. The next one is independent provision of public services. Next one is alternatives for provision of medical insurance. As we know, in Moldova, the mandatory medical insurance is monopolized, and we believe that there should be alternatives. Then broadening the base for independent involvement in solving development challenges. Another one is getting rid of cash or developing a cashless economy. And there are three more. Identifying the mix of public and alternative health service vision, very much related with one on medical insurance. And finally, there are two more: how to educate the private sector to contribute more to the social development, and one very much related to this one, how to motivate rich businessmen to support the Moldovan public sector. Even though I might disagree here, because there are different definitions for rich. Probably it's how to motivate the society to contribute more to advancing social good. I think it's a more neutral formulation.
Shall we hear from our colleagues over there, and then we can have a bit?
Do we have to stand up now?
Yeah. Stand up. Probably useful for everyone.
Okay, so we're going to use blockchain as the underlying technology. It doesn't specifically have to be decentralized, it can be permissioned. But the core of the aspect is digital identity. The reason why we need digital identity is it creates social inclusion for identification, because most people actually in the world and everywhere don't have actually identification, so they're not financially included or socially included. From a rural aspect, it is actually a little bit more than just rural inclusion, so it could be financial services, healthcare, down to private and government management. So the beautiful parts of the blockchain is you can actually do voting, and it cannot be manipulated. The risk factors, though, are education, and the very common thing of human laziness to change, so breaking the mold, and corruption. So you can solve numerous problems with one solution, digital identity, because you are then able to implement this in various sectors for inclusion. Financially, government-wise, healthcare, entrepreneurship. That's our presentation. Very simple.
Any questions from this group? So our friends over there. So we're all believers that blockchain will sorry, yeah.
Please.
Any questions from this group? We all believe blockchain will solve the world? Come on.
It's not necessarily that even though myself I put two stickers containing blockchain on it, blockchain per se might not necessarily solve the issues, but the broader adoption of blockchain is definitely one of those elements that is moving us closer to a reality that we are looking forward. Absolutely.
So here's a controversial narrative. Yeah, I buy the blockchain. I think it's really important. But actually, what it will drive is your personal networks. So if your networks are strong, you will get stronger. And network effect has a very particular logic. You will know it, right? What does it do? Network effect drives a very powerful logic mechanism, which isn't decentralized, which effectively is a power law. And in a way, blockchain will also accentuate the power law organization of society. And it will make it more powerful, quicker, faster, What do you think about that? Because I hear it, but I think there's what's the critical other side of blockchain? So that's where if you put blockchain with universal basic income, it becomes interesting. You start to actually decentralize as well as you decentralize capital agency as well as creating network power. But blockchain by itself is likely, as you've seen with platform economies everywhere, what have they done? Because remember, the blockchain is not decentralized. Everyone keeps telling you that, it's not. Fundamentally, the database structure is a centralized structure. So if I put elephants on the left side or on the X side of a database and pink flamingos on the right side, that becomes the way you read into the blockchain. So the organizing of the database is centralized. And if you want to crypt a blockchain, it's really easy. You crypt how you put stuff in. You don't have to crypt it inside, you crypt it actually at the point of entry into the chain itself. So neither does it need to be transparent, nor does it need to be decentralized. It can actually do all these other things. It is incredibly powerful as an open machine, open computing machine. So it's just worth recognizing that blockchain also brings with it organizing logic, which will be a power law logic. And the power law logic has implications for society in quite fundamentally different ways. So everyone talks about why I thought the presentation on sort of credit-based systems was interesting, why giving credits was more interesting than giving money, is because if you look at most Western societies, actually the debt capacity isn't there. So most individuals don't actually have the surplus cash to effectively invest in you. So that's why crowdfunding is relatively small. But the underwriting capacity is huge. But if I was to underwrite you by £100 and 100 people were to underwrite you by £100, actually you can unlock large-scale mainstream finance. So you can do some really interesting hybrid things. Credit Agricole are doing that, where basically what they're doing is you underwrite the risk, but actually mainstream finance can come in really powerful ways as well. So there's new hybrid business models coming out as well. So in this nirvana of blockchain, right, there's also the logic of power. And who controls the browser window in a blockchain actually has a huge amount of power, which is why many people are doing it. So, okay. So any thoughts, like when you start to think about a blockchain-driven society, and remember, the real power of banks is their fractional banking power, when they do 10x times the money you put in, store into them. Blockchain and trust-based systems will eventually get to some of those things, but currently they're not. So, go for it.
Actually, it's not about the fractional reserve of the bank. The banks control more data on us day to day.
Yeah.
So the blockchain, regardless of decentralized private permissions, there is actually ways with using the blockchain you can control your personal data and personal persona, especially relating to banks, financial institutes, government organisations, because every time you go to the bank, you ask for your ID. How many times is our IDs photocopied in the same organisation? They're collecting non-stop data.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's worth having that.
For sure, it's a very great idea about blockchain, but what I'm thinking, that's why it's very interesting for you. So you'll get more involved in this blockchain. You will want to use it probably more and more, and this information blockchain is not encrypted. I mean, it can be controlled. For example, if you go to the bank, it's not really interesting to go to the bank day by day, every day. Blockchain you can access even through your mobile phone, yes?
You got to understand, blockchain is actually, no, I might as well wait until I do my presentation after, that will explain it. Yeah.
Well, I think that information is not encrypted, and it's very easy to be controlled. It's actually, you will be controlled more than maybe through the banks. What do you think? You think no? And actually, what I'm thinking about, it's a big risk, because you will get involved more and more in that, and in one day, probably it can be cracked somehow.
No, let's be clear. The banks are pockets of risk, and the bigger the banks are, the bigger the risks are.
But
The blockchain technology is moving us to a reality when the risk is dispersed. And not only that the risk is dispersed, but the nexus between the one who offers the financing or the creditor and the debtor is direct. There is no need for, let's put it this way, for a genuinely financial intermediary, but there could be a need for an information intermediary, meaning that the role of the information is increasing. Because essentially, if we think about the banks, in my opinion, their strongest advantage is their control over the information. Who has excess liquidity and who has demand for liquidity. And this is genuinely the issue, the problem that they're solving. They're solving an information problem. And in the internet age, there is no need for this type of intermediary to solve the information problem. As easy as that.
Cool. But, I mean, just to challenge one thing, the decentralization of risk is fine in an equally decentralized society. So in terms of decentralization of wealth, if you get asymmetries of wealth and you put blockchain on it, actually it will accentuate that power law structure.
We cement.
Exactly. This is what I'm saying. So when technologists give you the idea of blockchain, it will also cement that power law society. So what are the social infrastructures, right? So after World War, we built the NHS. We built educational institutions. We built banks for the poor in the history of 15th century. What are the new social institutions required for a blockchain decentralized society? And I think this is where it gets really interesting.
Perhaps that's a financially literate society. Because now the whole advance in not only in blockchain, but in anything related to development is the unequal distribution of knowledge.
Yeah, asymmetry of knowledge in marketplace. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so now what I'd like you to do, you've probably heard each other's presentations. There was a cluster here which was looking at also health and health-related issues. Can I just ask one question, which is, the health people, were you interested in alternative health practices, or were you interested in supplementary private health, like provision? Where were you going with this? Was this the idea that actually there's other healthcare provision that's possible that the state's not providing, and verification models, or were you going literally just private provision? Alternative and private provision. So, which is also really interesting, because I'm sure our blockchain friends here will talk about verification models. So how do you verify, how do you build trust-based models on practitioners, all the trust-based infrastructure required for this? So one of the big things we're seeing is the deprofessionalization of society, where professionals are institutes to building other trust-based infrastructures, which I think will be, which I think is really interesting. So there's a little bit of a group here around health, and there's a very large group over there on blockchain and blockchain futures. But also perhaps some of the other stuff. Am I missing, who are the outliers here? Who else wanted to discuss something much more significantly different from there? Those are the two messages I was getting. Health, anti-corruption.
I'm not sure if it's interesting for
Okay, so there's two models of anti-corruption. One, blockchain is the answer, which it isn't. But the other model is effectively saying that you have to play policeman and you have to provide a health cover at such a large rate there's no incentive to effectively do corruption, which is actually how every other civilization has ever solved these issues. You have to take politicians out of the window of wanting to be corrupted. You have to pay them so much that they no longer want to be corrupted because the risk to their long-term well-being is so large. That's how people usually isolate corruption. I mean, it's interesting. It's exactly what's happened in the UK in terms of police, politicians, politician wages, all the way through. It's been interesting. What you do is you take them out of the desire for corruption. And blockchain doesn't really deal with corruption. Like, I know people talk about it, but I don't think it does. Yeah, go for it. Let the group have a chat.
So I think we can disagree with the statement that blockchain. So there is no any policy about corruption. So we would like to state that there is one policy, is called performance management of political appointees or politicians. So as far as they're well assessed and they are praised by special advisors, for example, in the UK. So I think this is the first way to prevent corruption. So they can, because they be more accountable. Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, absolutely, and they'll be responsible there for their actions and for their words by being evaluated and assessed. So that will be a good driver to move on and to reach aims and goals, mission, values, etc., etc. I think that's, and in that sphere, the blockchain works perfectly.
Platform technologies do exactly the same thing. I mean, you're right, but like, it's not necessarily. Yeah.
I will. Yes, it's working. What I'm thinking is that human being is to want more always want more. If we'll pay, okay, not we. If they will be paid more, they will want more also. And if they will think that there is a possibility to make more money legal or illegal way, they will do that. But it's also corruption.
Yeah, so here's two things. So all the data suggests that certainly so this is a UK and US data, that if you get to about $34,000 to $44,000 annual salary, the thing that really motivates you is, hey, I think you're great. It's social recognition. It's actually, social recognition is a much more powerful device than actually financial incentives. And again, the other thing we have to be very careful about, corruption of 0.08% of the population is a tolerable risk that you take. So actually the motivation structures, partly what we don't build is the social recognition structures. We don't build the social reward structures. So all the bollocks, after you get about 38, 44,000, actually it's your manager or your director recognizing the work you're doing is more powerful than any financial incentive. And the financial incentive story is crap. It's written by CFOs who don't actually know human behavioral technologies. It doesn't work. Actually, people think it's the money, it's not the money. So it's really interesting what the data really says around this stuff is quite different. So, yeah. Okay, so there seems to be a blockchain group here, which I think is kind of really interesting. And I hope there's some challenging questions in there about what the institutional parameters are, maybe complementary institutional logics to a blockchain future. That would be really interesting, and that could go as far as alternative verification. So if we destroy our institutions, which means that I'm an architect because somebody tells me I'm an architect, but build verification models which are organic and developable. You can have open verifiable models, which technologies like blockchain and platforms allow. So I think there's a group here to talk perhaps about the blockchain story. And then there's probably a smaller group to talk about some of this other stuff. Shall we split it? One to be more technology orientated and one to look at the institutional infrastructures of kind of blockchain futures. So one to look at what blockchain can do, and then what blockchain needs, what a blockchain future needs in order to drive it to be equitable, inclusive, and all the other things. Maybe that's a complementary conversation. Okay, blockchain futures, you're hosting as part of the team, and we can do here, and I'll host here, is what the institutional infrastructures for a blockchain future looks like. So what, universal basic income, crazy ideas. What could they look like? Cool? Do you want now? Yeah? So we're going to do 12 more minutes and then it's a wrap? Yeah? So 12 more minutes of conversation, then over to you and you can do your presentation, sir. Should we do that?
Exactly what I'm talking
Okay. Well, maybe we present then. That would be great. And I mean, yeah. Yeah. Is that right?
Yeah, sure. If everything is, everybody is okay with that.
I'm okay with that. I'm going to complete it.
Deci, în continuare vom asculta o prezentare din partea domnului Lee Gibson Grant, care are o vastă experiență antreprenorială de succes în telecomunicații și eficiență energetică. De asemenea, în anul 2015 a fondat un proiect de consultanță bazată pe blockchain și dumnealui va vorbi deoarece atât de des am auzit astăzi despre blockchain și despre această tehnologie, vom trece în revistă și o experiență deja de-a domnului Gibson cunoscută și o să fie cunoscută și pentru noi. Can you? Yeah.
Okay. So my presentation is about 6-7 slides. I don't believe in boring, long statisticals. So you hear a lot about blockchain technology. Well, you're going to ask yourself a question, why is it called Drachmae? Why is it after Greece? Very simply put, is during the period of last year, blockchain technology is meant to be the saviour of the world. It was meant to have saved Venezuela, Nigeria, Greece, but it was all propaganda to boost the price of the application on top called Bitcoin. Bitcoin is something very separate to blockchain technology, and Bitcoin does not save you. You've got to own it and hope it increases in price before you get any advantage. So when I went to Greece, the argument was, how can blockchain technology provide any benefits to Greece? Would it solve any of their problems? Seems they've got a 350 billion euro debt, but actually when you can compare what happened here in Moldova for 1 billion, it's actually the same. It was just done legally, and the banks have stolen 80-90% of that 350 billion went to save the banks, which was filtered out to other European banks. So exactly the same, but done in a legal way, not internal. But it was actually internal. So from this project, I went to a small island, little Greek island, 1 hour from Athens. It was a small municipality. Whilst this was going on during the capital controls, every mainstream media outlet jumped onto this project. What they didn't realise is I was there to debunk the technology. I wanted to prove that all of these companies receiving hundreds of millions of dollars investment or whatever are fairy tales, myth or reality. But out of that, I found realities. Out of 71 use cases, 67 are myth. Companies which were getting paid, well, Bill Gates paid somebody $100,000 to write a white paper. Can you SMS Bitcoin? I've been doing it for 4 years. We've been doing it in Africa for a long time. I've been working with other banks, central banks and other organisations in Africa, testing this stuff out for rural inclusion, social integration, many other areas. But to cut the short story, that's where Drachmae comes from. So I am actually, some people call me the blockchain project killer, because I debunk their ideas, because of it's not true. I don't need to explain to you really how the blockchain works, but the real various case to it is, this is how it works. Yes, we have a central point, which is the issue, because in identity, which is the actual core to everything we do nowadays, we can create fake identities, fake visas, fake passports. With the decentralized blockchain, it's distributed. We still have the access point to put the data onto the blockchain. But because it's very traceable on a public blockchain, it is very easy to discover very fast. So even if a fake identity is put there, it's discoverable. It's the same when they say Bitcoin is used for anti-terrorism, corruption, fraud, whatever. You can actually trace it. The American government proved it. When they were investigating Silk Road, one of their law enforcement agents, well, two of them, actually took bribes and stole Bitcoins. And because they were going through the blockchain, they proved it's not anonymous, it's public, it's traceable. And this has been my argument for 3 years, and why I've been doing things in Africa. The idea was to use the blockchain as an underlying security, a second layer, a bottom line, nothing fancy, to mitigate against fraud and corruption, money manipulation, etc. So when you look at having everything public and very discoverable, do you think corrupt politicians want that? Of course they're not. Not even charities, NGOs want that. That's for sure. I mean, if we look at USAID, with what happened in Haiti, they raised $500 million. They built 6 little huts. So where's the rest? Got to ask yourself a question. A lot of dinners and a lot of champagne. So the opportunity. So it's actually not blockchain. It's actually a distributed ledger technology. It's a database. Blockchain came with Bitcoin, but it's a distributed ledger, and that's where the technology will go to at the end. So for identity, if we look at South Korea, the black market price for identity has gone so low to 0.008%, or 0.17 of a mold overlay. You can tell how easy it is to access the ID numbers in South Korea because the price is worthless on the black market. And that works the same in other countries. That's how accessible your persona is, your data. Let's set aside Facebook. That's for your jokes, your parties, etc., whatever you want to put there. But your real information, your financial information, your date of birth, what you own, all these things, is much more accessible. This is where the blockchain technology does come into play. But that's an underlying technology, so you still have to rely over the top. But then we also come into the hardware aspect. So cryptographic keys are vulnerable to hackers. I could be cheeky to hack all of your phones and tell you what all of your last connections on Wi-Fi networks were. I won't do it. I'm not that good. Am I? I don't know. The next part is 30% of the world's population, well, they don't actually have identity because it's a social, a rural integration problem, so they also don't have financial services. So when you think 30% of the world has lack of identity, they're not financially included or socially included, how many of you with identity are currently having your identity stolen, used, and you don't even know about it every day? The banks have so much information on you, so when they get hacked, you are now vulnerable. So this is some of the stuff we were doing as a one-time test on this small island. This is just some of the front ends, but really this is a small portion of what we were testing around blockchain technology. But we didn't just test decentralized, we also tested centralized. So we took a mobile bank platform from Africa, which is used and authorized by a central bank, and we found the holes in the security. How easy it was to add a zero, move a zero, change a few things. We looked at the remittance aspect, where the blockchain could actually fall into play, how it would be used. Stocks, travel, financial inclusion, loyalty rewards. The actual use cases for blockchain technology is very vast, but it's only as strong as the user, and that's your identification. When you want remittance, to collect it or send it, you need to have ID to send it or receive. When you're on holiday, you have to get on a plane. You have to show your passport. When you go to the foreign exchange office, you need your passport. To get a loan, you need to set up a bank account. You need your passport. You need your proof of address. So how many times do we actually use all of our identification? So it's not really about the blockchain, it's about our identity. How do we protect it? How do we protect our personal persona? And that was why most cases around blockchain technology will fail. I won't tell you it's going to succeed. I'm not going to say it's going to save the world. It's the identity. Our personal identity is what drives to mitigate against corruption. It's what drives social, rural integration, because you have our identity. You are now able to be also included into financial services. It could be into government aid, healthcare. Because if you don't exist, you're not going to get anything. So that is basically my little presentation. That's my details. But to push on with it is, where do you actually think the critical masses in today's age of technology? We hear about cloud servers, cloud hosting, we hear about all kinds of things. But are we really protected from identity theft or cloning? Yeah. I can clone your identity and maybe I could get an American Express Black Platinum, hopefully. Go on holiday. Who would like to go on holiday somewhere? It's not that hard. So we need to look at it from that aspect. What is the most important thing around our day-to-day? It's your identity. You need it. If you don't have your identity, you don't get nothing. And this is the problem. Identity is an asset to a government, to a bank, to Facebook. If you have a who's got a Facebook account? Right. Facebook, right. Who's got a Twitter account? LinkedIn? Right. So, you do realise that you're worth $120 to Facebook? $120. If you have a Facebook account, you're worth $120. If you have a Twitter account, you are worth $108 to Twitter. You are worth $86 if you're on LinkedIn. Your identification, your personal persona, is an asset to the platforms you use. That's how they value Facebook. It's not just on their Facebook ads. The reason why they make you pay so much for Facebook ads is because they've got your personal persona. Every time you do something, they take more information. That's why they stick advertisement up. So it's like, I put something, I'm in Moldova. Next minute, I've got Moldovan hotels ads coming up. Yeah, they're following the trend. So your personal identity is always used. Unfortunately, if you put something on social media, that's your fault. There's nothing that can be done. But your private information is what is important. And that's what should not be shared. So one of the experiments which we've been playing with and works for e-governance, it's nothing to do with financial services. That comes later. Everything else comes later. It's how you protect your identity. So we were experimenting with the idea of using the blockchain because it hasn't been hacked to date. But the question was, which blockchain? Decentralized or private? Permission-based? There's lots. And when you take into consideration that blockchain technology has only just started to really get a hype, it's already had more money invested into it than the internet. And it hasn't even started. It's estimated to be tens of billions in the next couple of years. So you have a technology jump which is going to come. So it's not about decentralized. It's about the security that the blockchain provides. That's the key element. It's not about the decentralized governance. It's not about the money moving whatever. It's the fact that you can actually store your identity into the blockchain. And because it's not been hacked, you're a little bit more safe than the existing systems. So if you wanted to go and open a bank account and the bank had to ask you your permission for a token verification to access your information, that makes you safer because they can access it, but they don't control it. So you're now securing your information. But because you're using your identity on the blockchain, do we need the bank anymore? Because you can actually have your money on the blockchain. So there's sides to it which you need to look at, think about, and see what is valid. So for one of the big things which I was working on was a central bank. It was actually nominated by Forbes or something, one of the projects I was doing, the central bank in a box. Now it's actually called a piece of code, you copy it, you put some miners or staking, and then suddenly you have a blockchain born. You can create any currency. But if the central bank issues its own digital currency, and it uses the blockchain because of the public ledger only, just for the transparency and the security, you could issue a centralized digital currency. That's fine, but it can be hacked. So you're still on the same problem. You've not solved any problems. But by using the digital token issued by a central bank, they can also enforce for your identity to be on the blockchain, which protects your persona. At the same time, reduces your risk of loss, especially with banks. Because at the end of the day, if, let's give you an example, the Moldovan bank which lost $1 billion, they've given it to bail out other banks, but the other banks made some magic zeros on the end of some of their numbers. That's why you need to bail the banks out. But on the blockchain, it can only be increased, let's say, if the central bank increased it. It's not if the banks increase it. So there's a manipulation which can stop. But it's not about the currency, it's just about the security elements and the fact that it hasn't been hacked to date. So it has more security than the nuclear power station's security at the moment. So for now, it's the choice of technology which everybody is now targeting. But nobody has discovered the real use case for blockchain technology or distributed ledger. Nobody has discovered it. There's great projects, but nobody actually has discovered the real use case for it. But now they are, and it's revolving around digital identity, based on the fact it hasn't been hacked yet, and how information can be distributed, so that it's not in one place, which reduces the risk of manipulation. But if you have some good ideas, let's find out. Since we started off on the topic of blockchain, what are the risks? Somebody must have some ideas of risks.
So I think that the biggest risks can be, because this idea is really great idea, it will have a very powerful database. It can be very attractive to a biggest pocket in the world. So who has the biggest pocket, biggest wallet in the world can be probably interested in buying this powerful database. So what I think is that for me, as like a simple, normal, I don't know, Moldovan citizen, I don't have millions and thousands. So for me, probably yes, it's not so dangerous and it's interesting also. But for really big pockets and wallets, I don't think they will risk to use this blockchain because and one day their information can be just read it. So what I'm thinking is that probably the biggest pocket in the world will be interested in buying it somehow or crack.
The problem you have with blockchain technology is you can't download the information. You can download the blockchain, but the encryption is placed inside the accounts. So the account will be available. Actually, go back a minute. So if you look up at the top there where it says minus NA, you see a number, the third column, that's basically what you would see on the public blockchain. What is there worth buying? Yes, your transaction will be there, but it's not really shown. But you can also make it so the amount is not shown. The transaction exists. It could be anything which shows, but you would think it's a transaction, but it's not. It could be information, a timestamp posted. So it's fine to download, let's say, if it's a decentralized blockchain, you download the blockchain to confirm with other people that have the blockchain. That's how the blockchain's integrity is stayed, because everybody has a copy, and when there's a transaction done, it's confirmed between the network. That's why there's the security to it. If it was a centralized, well, from what you're saying, it would have to have the database available to download. That's centralized. So if we do also pass over to a distributed ledger which can be private, you've still got to trust the node holders on the private chain. So what you're saying is pretty possible, because somebody does have, because nobody is going to be decentralized or distributed fully, maybe in 20, 30 years, because it reduces big data costs, IoT, which is why IBM is very much involved into it. But from a perspective of where would I want my data, I actually hide a lot of things on the blockchain. I don't put them onto Google Drive. I actually keep my logins to my bank account on the blockchain, and it's public. Because I can access that easily from anywhere. But I can, because I own the key, private key to my account. If you own the private key, you control the account. If somebody else has a key and you have a key, you don't fully control the account.
I think that this technology will be very useful to the one-stop shops. Do you know? Because everything is centralized over there. You can access to any information with the ID and other stuff. For example, bank accounts even. Today, each country, they develop own strategy on one-stop shop policies. For example, in Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, in Georgia, Estonia, and in Canada, Centrelink, for example, they use the centralized strategy. And if, in my opinion, if this blockchain can be presented to these services, service delivery agencies, like, for example, one-stop shop called in Azerbaijan Asan, in Georgia public halls, in Kazakhstan is government for citizens, Centrelink in Canada, for example. So that could be, the information will be protected, and I think that line should be covered through the legislation. And I think there must be a law, for example, that can. This is actually this is not a copyright law. This is something.
But so if you look at Canada, they basically, the Royal Mint of Canada was testing out internally, and the French company which does the PDQ machines, very big company, they do about half of the PDQ Visa card machines for around the world. They test inside to issue from the Royal Mint of Canada a currency. Over the blockchain they were doing tests. A few days ago, Senegal's central bank has issued the ECFA. Tunisia last year started its process to launch its own digital currency. Georgia, the government there has been very big onto the topic of blockchain. There was a very, very large event which happened over there where companies went from all over to set up shop there. Dubai has the government there, the Prime Minister has a roadmap to, every government wants to have the innovation in their country because it's the new hyper technology, the hyper word. The problem is nobody knows how to regulate it or legislate it. The most easiest country which I know of is the UK. They simply said, we need to look at the consumer protection. That's the first step. So if someone's using it to buy goods, or if they're registered on an exchange, we've got to look at the consumer protection, KYC and AML, straightforward. So there's a very slow steps which they took. The Isle of Man tried to make itself the crypto valley. It's well known for e-gaming. a lot of companies went there to set up because it's very relaxed. The biggest issue you have around blockchain technology is banks don't want to give the companies bank accounts. It's ironic, isn't it? They don't want to let a business have a bank account. So it makes it inaccessible to certain people to use cryptocurrency. But now that's changing very fast because the countries are saying, okay, well, we'll leave it under this legislation for the moment. Let's just focus on KYC and AML. So the biggest users really for this technology isn't the Western world. It's the emerging markets, Africa, South America, because Africa, for example, is way ahead in lots of technology, especially mobile money, especially for identity, the ones which do get their identity. Yeah, they're leapfrogs ahead of Europe. Plus with the European Union, you have so many legislations and laws, it just hinders innovation. So that's why one of the reasons I voted Brexit, because I wanted to do work in the UK. For me, it was easier to be in the UK where it's being accepted, this technology, and they're not heavily regulating it. They're actually trying to invest into it. They're trying to encourage. And this is one of the reasons why I'm moving my project from Greece to Moldova. Because Moldova has the characteristics to test so many things with blockchain technology due to its situation. And it also is on the middle part of Russia and the European Union. So it's a good central point for people to come here to experiment with this technology. When people start to come here to experiment, then everybody will start to find new ideas. So the one thing I like about blockchain technology is you find one person who says, oh, I don't like that, it's not legal. 1 month later, he's trying to work a project, see how it would work. It's very strange. You don't like it? Now you're working on it. Many years ago, a couple of years ago, academics, there's one actually who lives here in Moldova. He's actually the reason why I came to Moldova, because he looked at some of my work, and I've now co-authored an academic journal with him. He came here, he loves tourism, and we were chatting. I said, so how did you get into Bitcoin and blockchain? He said, well, I was doing some research and I did a white paper, and all the academics in my university laughed at me as if I was an idiot. Now, you're an idiot if you're an academic and don't know nothing about Bitcoin or blockchain. But the same ones laughed at him. Now they're all experts. But just to be clear, what is a blockchain expert? Doesn't exist. It's a coder, an IT person, a mathematician. So if you're a developer, you're automatically a blockchain expert. It doesn't exist. So it's how you want to discover. So with the aspect of database, well, if it's a decentralized blockchain, everybody has a copy, but it doesn't mean they have access to the information. If it's a permissioned or a private chain, that's different. Which is also the future. Because many countries have local jurisdictional regulation. And this is why big banks like UBS, Credit Suisse, Bank of America, JP Morgan, they're all playing with this technology for trading assets. The problem they have is due to their banking regulations, specific information cannot cross the border. It has to stay within the country. This is why PayPal left Turkey. Specific information must stay in the country. And PayPal could not comply to their local regulation. So it will come to private blockchains, permission blockchains. But that's a new evolution which is coming and being experimented with everywhere at the moment, government level to banks to private organisations. So has anyone else got any ideas of any risks?
I just have one question. You said that IBM is involved, yes, in that?
Yeah, they're doing an IoT. They've been doing it for a couple of years.
What does they think about the technological
Well, I wonder why they're doing something with it and investing money into it, so there must be a reason.
Yeah.
They've been doing it for 2 years.
I'm just interested what they're doing. I mean, if the system will be, for example, reloaded, I mean, overloaded. So my question was, what does the IBM think about the blockchain? I mean, if it doesn't have like a centralized database, isn't it complicated, sort of complicated?
No, it reduces their cost, distributes the costings, the hosting. That's the point. It also solves big data issues. That's why banks are looking at it, because they accumulate so much data. With IBM, they're doing some IoT project. So what they're doing is internal, and because IBM provides lots of services to banks and governments.
I trust these guys.
Yeah, but what they're doing is they're getting ready for the evolution, but they're experimenting with it. But they've been experimenting with it for 2 years. But when you think of who IBM is, that they provide services to banks, to governments, it'll be a very quick change. But they're coming out from the IoT perspective, which is a different thing.
Exactly.
Entirely.
Just technological part.
Anybody else? Or have you all fallen asleep? No ideas? No suggestions? Have we finished?
În rețea, adică în domeniul IT este așa adică o opinie. Adică participanții la, nu știu, developeri, programatori, și tot întotdeauna când este vorba de securitate, să-i spun că când e vorba de securitate, eu spun că asta e o problemă de timp. Da, și doar să propunerea de a trece identitatea persoanei pe sisteme informaționale, adică acum este ceva. Dar în genere toate operațiunile, cred că e problematic.
I fully agree with you. Everything is hackable nowadays. Your mobile phone, everything is hackable. If it's got an RH antenna in, anything. So when it comes down to security, for the moment, blockchain is the most secure. It's not been hacked. It will be one day. And I'm sure there's lots of people trying. And I think that's also, from the IBM perspective, is one of the things they're looking at. That's what the governments are looking at. And that's also why digital identity is very compelling on the blockchain. But it's not just the blockchain, you also have hardware. So when you're doing identity, you need to factor in the handset, the iOS, Windows. So we have a long list. The point of storing your identity encrypted, that's a different thing. But yes, the blockchain could be hacked any day, but it hasn't yet in 7 years. That's why everyone is interested in it, from that security level. From the digital identity level, I would not want my digital identity on a centralized server, because everyone knows already how easy it is to get a database. Let's look at Panama, the Panama files for the offshore companies. How easy that was to take the database. How easy it is, banks are being blackmailed at the moment, ransomed. There's actually one which has been announced today. And they're being ransomed for Bitcoin. So it's very hard to put an opposition, or a negative or a positive, either direction, because centralized is just as bad, but currently decentralized blockchains haven't been hacked. So they do have a security up level. But if you would trust a centralized system to control your data, and then that account, your information has been hacked, and your private emails, your private life, everything has been distributed, and then the other person whose details were, let's say, on the blockchain, wasn't hacked at the same time, you're not going to be a happy person. That person there is going to be happy. But until we get to that evolution of hacked blockchains, we'll get to that step. But right now, blockchain technology, even after 7 years, is so new, it's growing. Nobody really knows the real use case or how to use it. Once we find those use cases, we will then be able to get to the point of hacking. From my personal view, is private chains. That is what will be the dangerous part, because at the end of the day, the nodes to support that private chain network is controlled by an organization. So there's no way of not knowing that that database has been downloaded internally. With a decentralized method, it's distributed and encrypted. Everybody has a copy around the world, but that's also a negative because of local jurisdictional control. And I'm pretty sure for Moldova, and I'm going to find out over the next few months, that what information must be secured within Moldova cannot leave the border, what can be used on a decentralized blockchain, because I'm going to be doing use cases here. Decentralized, private permission, I'm going to be putting more tests. But what I would like, and this is one of the reasons for being here in Moldova, is there's so many developers. So let's see if Moldovan developers can hack the blockchain. And Moldova will be very famous very quick. I think that should be a competition, actually. So that's a good idea. So it's very hard. This is the argument. I'm not a developer. I understand the technology very well because I've come from telecoms. I come from mobile money. And I know from the telecoms perspective the risks of information being stolen, call data being stolen, because it's happened to me many, many times. And you can spend so much money on fancy systems and security. It makes no difference. But when you're losing millions of records of people's phone numbers, then you've got a problem. Then when you go to the mobile money aspect, information on their financial side, if people gain access to logins, they can move money around through an e-wallet, let's say, or through an online wallet, then you have a problem. How do you protect yourself? And that's why 3 years ago, I was looking at blockchain to provide that possible layer of security. Not to be the security, but the extra layer. I'm not saying that blockchain solves all problems, because that's fairy tales. You might be Vitalik Buterin of Ethereum building the supercomputer of the world, which will never be built.
Totodată ați menționat că blockchain-ul nu poate fi aplicat în țările izolate, care nu permit ca datele cu caracter personal să treacă hotarul, să păstreze pe serverii străini. Să eu am înțeles poate ceva greșit.
Adică informația pentru fiecare țară, informația specială care trebuie să nu iasă adică după granițe.
Da, și mi-a spus că chestia asta nu e posibilă de aplicat într-o țară care nu permite ca informația să iasă.
Fiecare țară are informație aparte și
Dacă se păstrează pe servere care sunt descentralizate și pot să fie oriunde în lume, așa ca nodurile, eu știu, de la Tor sau cum, poate să fie despre asta, cred că să are în vedere. Poate să păstreze pe servere care sunt și în afara hotarelor Republicii Moldova, așa ori?
Okay, from what I understood, it depends on the Moldovan financial legislation. I'm going to give you an example for the EU, the UK, Switzerland. UBS Bank or Credit Suisse trades stocks and bonds. Certain information must stay within Switzerland's borders. Certain information must stay within London. certain information must stay in France. That's why they have a third-party intermediary, the broker, because they must keep certain information here, and then the broker is simply formulating the transaction. With the blockchain, it does it all. But because of the financial legislations, and it's not just for financial services, there's other areas as well, it actually revolves around identity, corporate identity. The information cannot be stored outside. Turkey is a very good example with PayPal. PayPal could not comply to Turkey's local legislation for the identification to be on servers hosted in Turkey. So that is why they terminated their services in Turkey. I worked on a project in Namibia. Basically, was the first blockchain mobile bank to ever exist in the world, and we were doing tests. And that is the same platform as we used in Greece. We were doing tests in Namibia. We were testing out how to solve various issues. But due to Namibian legislation, the server we had in London, we had to move the whole platform to Namibia. The use of the blockchain, the transactions were going on a decentralized ledger, it would not comply to local legislation. So there is areas which are grey, there's areas which are black, but you can still use a decentralized ledger as a security mechanism, but you don't have to put transactions and information on it. But if you want to use it internally, you have to look at local legislation. And this is why all the banks, the ESMA is doing reports, and they're looking at, the European Bank, Central Bank is looking at it, doing reports and their little things. HSBC had a little black room 5 years ago, and they never told anyone. They didn't even know most of them, but they had a little black room. Because the big banks are looking at the blockchain because they see transparency, security. Publicly they say, we're looking for transparency. The reality, they're looking to how they can game it, but keep the security mechanism. But they still have to comply to local legislation. So if their local branch is in Switzerland, they fall under the regulation, so they need to build around that local legislation. Moldova will be exactly the same. It's happened the same to me in Africa. It's happened to me the same in Greece. You have to, some cases for decentralized work, some don't. It depends on legislation. Luckily for Moldova, there's not much legislation.
So you need a good lawyer.
No, you need to test it, first of all, break it, and wait for the lawyer to come. Because unless you can prove and identify the flaws, see, when you're using blockchain technology, you could identify flaws which may break the law, but also may supplement the law. That's the interesting part. So you've got to break a few rules, but the easiest way, you've got to break a few eggs to make an omelette. Simple term.
What do you think? Will you meet some countries which will not accept this blockchain? I mean, to use this blockchain. And which countries cannot accept, for example?
Ecuador has been a good one. They banned Bitcoin, but 6 months later they issued their own central bank currency, centralized. But people still use Bitcoin. Doesn't matter. You can't ban something which is technical. You'd have to switch the internet off.
You can test in North Korea.
I think North Korea is a good one, actually. yeah. North Korea, maybe. Never been there. Might try that one. No, there's many countries. Africa actually is very, very much up to speed on this. They've got set up lots of innovation labs. Because one of the things you've got to think about is Africa relies a lot on remittance.
They're just open to new things. Probably.
No. They rely on remittance. So when you think about, same for Moldova actually, I was looking at this. Let's say you, I think it's remittance is going up has gone up
one quarter was 50 million or something, whatever, remittance. So imagine that you're paying, it's estimated 7 to 9% fees, yeah? So imagine if you can use a technology where the country gets that extra 7%. That's why it's compelling to the country, because if you're on 50 million, you're losing 5 million. So for a small country like Moldova, the numbers make sense. Well, you want the people to get more money to bring into the ecosystem. And this is a lot of how it works for India, especially for Africa, because they want more money in. So why do they want to pay more fees to Western Union? Yeah?
I'll just make one small remark to answer one question, to answer the question that you have raised about the innovations in Africa, why the emerging markets like in Africa, in Central Asia or Southeastern Asia and Caucasus are running for innovations. There is a simple answer, because they have national strategies. All these national strategies are linked with innovations, to be honest with you. For example, Kazakhstan has a strategy had a strategy 2030, and then we have the 2015. So when in 2050 everything will be innovated in new form and modernized. At the same time, Azerbaijan has the same strategy, Georgia. And in whole Africa, you can see the countries like Kenya, Ethiopia, Nigeria, Swaziland, South Africa, yeah, they all have the strategies 2020, 2025, 2030. In all these strategies, everything is explained step by step how we can achieve success in
It's the same for the European Union. So, like, by 2020, they're talking about e-identity. The UN has a strategy for 2030.
They're driven by this. This is, I think, a good driver.
Do you know what's happening in Moldova? Well, we have also some strategies. For example, I remember we had some for 2015. Then we didn't manage to do them, to achieve these, to complete these strategies, and we just put them in the next plan for 2020. So I think it's long-term strategies.
You can't categorize Moldova the same as Africa and India, because
it's like that.
Yeah, but you can't categorize it the same as the other economies, because if you look at Africa, you have every large organization trying to galvanize the marketplace, because it's the emerging market, the amount of population. Every company wants a piece of that market. Europe is saturated. We've got so many service providers, there's hot dinners. The new markets are the emerging markets. So all of these goals are driven also by corporate goals, because you have corporates with their foundations. Really, the foundations aren't foundations. They're just they're investing and getting a tax break, but they're investing into their future market. It's the same with the Bill Gates Foundation. They support so many mobile money initiatives, technical initiatives, but actually it's just building up for other service partners to come in and roll out distribution. So for Moldova to go 2015 to 2020, I would say it's a bit like, we're going to build the road, we'll finish the road next week, but we'll have a little break and think about it and move it over, or we'll do it in next month. It's not the same. You can't compare Moldova to the rest.
Sure,
maybe with the EU integration, maybe that if there was a set date for integration into the EU, maybe there would be some very fast changes.
Because it will be controlled, much more controlled.
Well, it would have to comply to EU regulation for so many things, and that I would love to be here to watch that happen. Because,
I hope you will.
because it would be very intriguing.
Sure.
So but the areas for moving dates, it's not the same for Moldova, especially after what's happened with the central bank. That's a kickback.
Exactly.
So it's
We're
not
now just 10 years back.
maybe 20.
Yes, I think so. I didn't want to be so.
Or I guess would be a very beneficial for Moldova in that sense. The cornerstone of this will be the role of new public management, I think. if the role of new public management will be more strengthened, I think the innovations will be successfully implied and achieved in terms of public administration and the strategies, for example, in my opinion, and then the integration with the European Union. But I think you're in a good direction at the moment, because you have so many facilitators, as far as I see. That's my opinion.
Vă mulțumim mult pentru păreri. Eu vă invit, pentru că mai avem 15 minute până la închiderea oficială și cuvântul de închidere pe care îl va avea secretarul general al Guvernului, vă invit să servim o ceașcă de cafea în hall, să mai continuăm discuția despre finanțarea neconvențională și nu doar. Evident că a devenit deja o necesitate.
Au depus efort considerabil simțitor pentru o bună organizare și desfășurare a evenimentului de astăzi, partenerilor noștri care întotdeauna au fost împreună cu noi și avem certitudinea că și în continuare vom avea susținerea și aportul colegilor și partenerilor pentru continuarea implementării acelor inovații care au fost astăzi expuse prin paradigma caracteristică doar Republicii Moldova. Pentru următoarea ediție a forumului, desigur că vom veni și cu alte idei și vom aștepta și alte idei și propuneri de la colegii noștri. Vreau să mulțumesc tuturor participanților pentru această implicare în discuții, în elaborarea de viziuni și sunt convins că aceste propuneri, aceste viziuni care au fost expuse astăzi pe toate platformele vor avea o implicare concretă în dezvoltarea în continuare a Republicii Moldova. Vă mulțumesc mult!
Mulțumim foarte mult, domnul secretar general. Chiar eu cred că toate cuvintele deja sunt epuizate. Eu încă o dată vreau să vă mulțumesc pe dumneavoastră că ați venit. Aș vrea să mulțumesc speakerilor internaționali și locali pentru devotamentul și pentru cunoștințele pe care ne-au împărtășit. Așa că vă rog încă o dată o rundă de... Cum am spus, aceasta este doar o zi. Viața va continua de mâine. Dumneavoastră știți, partenerii dumneavoastră din Cancelarea de stat, ați făcut cunoștință mai aproape, eu sper, cu colegii de la MyLab. Știți cum să ne găsiți. Noi chiar suntem gata să vă ajutăm, nu neapărat doar cu realizarea proiectelor, cu conectarea la expertiza relevantă de chestii hotare, cu alți aliați posibili din Republica Moldova, din afara guvernului, din sector privat. Vă rugăm foarte mult să dovediți, începând cu mâine, că voi sunteți agenții schimbării în țara noastră. Vă mulțumim foarte mult și acum, cu mare drag, vă invităm la o mică recepție în care puteți să continuați să discutați cu colegii din alte ministere, din alte organizații, dar și cel mai important cu speakerii interesanți care au rămas pentru această seară cu noi și să stabiliți contacte, eventual și să discutați idei pentru cooperare. Vă mulțumim foarte mult și vă dorim o zi bună. Da, deci recepția va avea loc tot acolo unde am avut și prânzul, la etajul întâi, restaurantul ăsta. Mulțumim!